This is SpaceTime Series 29, Episode 29, for broadcast on the 9th of March 2026. Coming up on SpaceTime, discovery of the earliest known barred spiral galaxy, just like our own, but 12 billion years ago. Australia's Spirit satellite mission comes to an end, and the International Space Station to remain in orbit for an additional 2 years. All that and more coming up on SpaceTime.
Welcome to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary.
Our Milky Way galaxy is known as a barred spiral, and debate continues on exactly how the barred section of stars at the heart of these types of galaxies forms and evolves. Now, astronomers have discovered one of the earliest barred spiral galaxies ever seen. The findings, reported at the 247th meeting of the American Astronomical Society, could play an important role in science's understanding of galactic evolution. The newly discovered galaxy, catalogued as Cosmos 74706, is located some 11.5 billion light-years away. That's back in time when the universe was just 2.3 billion years old. The study's lead author, Daniel Ivanov from the University of Pittsburgh, says it's one of the earliest observed spiral galaxies containing a stellar bar, a sometimes striking visual feature that can play an important role in the evolution of a galaxy. He says the findings help constrain the time frame in which stellar bars could have first emerged in the universe. Now, these galactic bars aren't objects themselves, but dense collections of stars and gas that are aligned in such a way that in images taken perpendicular to the galactic plane, there appears to be a bright line bisecting the galaxy. Stellar bars can play a role in shaping a galaxy's evolution by funneling gas inwards from the outer reaches of a galaxy, feeding the supermassive black hole at the galactic center, and dampening star formation throughout the stellar disk. Ivanov says he wasn't surprised to find a barred spiral galaxy so early in the universe's evolution. He says some computer simulations have already suggested that bars can form at redshift 5, that's some 12.5 billion years ago. But in principle, he thinks it's not an epoch when you'd normally expect to find many of these objects. So it helps to be able to constrain the timescales of bar formation. Now, other researchers have reported earlier barred spiral galaxies, but the analyses of those are far less conclusive because the methods used to analyse the light's redshifts from those galaxies aren't as definitive as the spectroscopy used to validate Cosmos 74706. In other cases, the galaxy's light was distorted by massive foreground galaxies acting as gravitational lenses. Ivanov says this makes Cosmos 74706 the highest redshift spectroscopically confirmed unlensed barred spiral galaxy ever detected. This is SpaceTime. Still to come, Australia's Spirit satellite mission comes to an end, and the International Space Station to remain in orbit for an additional 2 years. All that and more still to come on SpaceTime. This episode of SpaceTime is brought to you by Squarespace. If you've ever wanted to make your mark online, whether you're just getting started or ready to take your business to new heights, Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform specifically designed to help you stand out and succeed. With Squarespace, you can easily claim your domain, build a beautiful website, showcase your skills and products, and even get paid all in one seamless place. And here's where it gets really exciting. Squarespace's design tools give everyone the power to create a website that looks like it came from a top-tier design studio. Whether you're showing off your portfolio, selling products, or booking clients, Squarespace has you covered. And there's more. Squarespace takes the mystery out of getting found by new customers with powerful built-in SEO tools. Your site's automatically optimized for search engines, complete with smart meta descriptions, an auto-generated sitemap, and everything you need to help your ideal audience find you faster. So are you ready to get started? Head on to squarespace.com/spacetime for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code SpaceTime to save 10% off your first purchase for a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/spacetime with the code SpaceTime. And of course, there's a link to the offer code in our show notes. Build your space online with Squarespace. Well, after more than 25 months of successful operations in orbit, the University of Melbourne's Spirit satellite mission has come to an end. Mission managers lost contact with the spacecraft in early January after the satellite began experiencing platform anomalies and communications were intermittently lost. Now, after careful assessment, the operations team have determined that reliable contact was unlikely to be restored, formally bringing the on-orbit phase of the mission to an end. The cause of the anomaly remains unknown. However, the mission did exceed its planned 2-year lifespan, proving the reliability of Australian-designed and built spacecraft. The Space Industry Responsive Intelligent Thermal, or SPIRIT spacecraft, was a technology demonstrator, testing next-generation capabilities ranging from a new gamma-ray space telescope and advanced thermal cooling systems in orbit to high-performance autonomous artificial intelligence operations in actual real-life space environments. Over its lifetime, the shoebox-sized 11.5-kilogram nanosatellite completed some 16,000 orbits of the Earth, travelling around 690 million kilometres. That's equivalent to the distance between the Earth and Jupiter. During that time, it downlinked more than 400 images and captured hundreds more for on-board edge computing research. The mission also undertook gamma and X-ray astronomy through the Hermes instrument, developed by the Italian Space Agency and international scientific partners. The mission's principal investigator, Michaela Trenti from the University of Melbourne, says that in the final months of 2025 alone, Spirit recorded more than 180 hours of X-ray data using its onboard instrument designed to detect gamma-ray bursts, powerful explosions that can occur when stars die or when neutron stars merge. Trenti says the successful deployment and operations of Hermes marked a significant achievement both for the validation of the technology and for the high-resolution timing of the measurements. In the short term, mission managers will focus on analysing and archiving mission data for the broader scientific community, with several research publications already in preparation. Lessons learnt from Spirit will inform the next generation of innovative payload designs, and it will help shape the next generation of Australian space technologies, from remote sensing to edge computing in orbit. Trenti says the spacecraft is now gradually descending through the 200-kilometre altitude level. That's where atmospheric drag will deorbit the vehicle, probably around August, allowing it to burn up in Earth's atmosphere.
We've just concluded the in-orbit operations of the satellite. The satellite was originally designed to operate for 24 months. We celebrated 24 months, second birthday of operations in orbit in December 25, and then everything was going strong. And then in January, we experienced a loss of communication with the satellite. And space is hard. Satellite has been exposed to a very harsh environment as it orbited Earth for over 16,000 times. So it's not surprising that you have a little bit of terror wear. It actually did much better than we were expecting.
And of course, things were made even worse by the incredible amount of space weather it's had to endure during its time in orbit.
Indeed. This is a really challenging time for satellites in orbit, because we launched the Spirit satellite in December 2023, when the solar activity was reaching the maximum. So we have gone through quite a bit of violent space weather storms. You have ejection of the outer layers of materials from the sun, so-called coronal mass ejections. And so you have these charged particles that start to travel through the solar system, and then they reach Earth. They get trapped into Earth's magnetic field, which is shielding us on the surface. But it also means that there are belts of charged particles in orbit. The satellite has to go through them, and they can be quite taxing on the electronic systems on the satellite. Spirit is naturally decaying in its orbit, and in any case, the mission would have been over by approximately July, because our orbit has decayed to the point where we'll now start to quickly spiral to lower and lower altitudes. And in July, maybe August, if the space weather is favorable, maybe a bit earlier if space weather is more temperamental, the Spirit satellite will have lowered its orbit to about 200 kilometers above the surface, at which point there is enough drag and enough frictions that the satellite will heat up quickly, spiral down even further, and then completely burn up in the process. So for a brief moment, it will be a shooting star.
What was the primary aim of the Spirit mission?
That's a really good question, and it depends on the type of aim that we're talking about, because I would say there were three primary aims. First, there was the aim to promote the growth of the Australian space industry, and to demonstrate that Australia was ready to design, fabricate, test, launch, and operate an internationally competitive satellite. And that, I think, was the primary aim in relation to the funding that we received from the Australian Space Agency to promote the growth of the local space industry and the space sector. From a scientific point of view, the primary aim was to study gamma and X-ray transients in the sky by demonstrating the capabilities of the Hermes scientific instrument that we received thanks to international cooperation with the Italian Space Agency. And so on Spirit, we had the first flight of the Hermes Space Telescope. We've been able to commission the instrument, measure the background, the performance. We have done some astronomical observations, and we have scientific data that are in the process of being analyzed and published. Then there is a third aim, which was to demonstrate novel technology for future missions, in particular made in Australia technology. And we have broken new ground in thermal control system. We have flown a Stirling cycle cryocooler that has cooled down and kept at stable temperature the Hermes instrument during the mission. And this is a type of cooling system which had never flown before on such a small satellite. We've also flown a graphic card processing unit, a GPU, that has allowed us to run a flexible computing environment to demonstrate artificial intelligence operations in orbit, so autonomous image processing using some of the small cameras on Spirit, and in particular the ability of the system to fine-tune itself with very limited input from the Mission Control Center. So very small satellite, just 11 and a bit kilos, but very packed with multiple objectives and multiple pieces of tech.
When you look at Australia's space history, we were, I think, the fourth nation in the world to build a satellite and then have it launched from our own soil. That was RESAT, which flew out of Woomera. Since then, there have been a few others, such as FedSat, but not many. Australia hasn't really grabbed the reins in a big way, has it?
Yeah, look, I think that That's a fair comment. We've been, if we look at the size of our domestic space sector compared to other economies around the world or similar in size to Australia, we're definitely, I think, lagging a little bit behind. There is still, I feel, hope for the future because there are many research organizations, startups across Australia who have really good ideas and they're working within the available resources to try to have impact. And I think that Spirit is one example of what we can do when we get together and multiple organizations in Australia collaborate with each other with a shared common goal of going up and doing a peaceful space exploration.
We've just had some great success with scramjet technology being launched on a Rocket Lab Electron-based rocket from the United States. Rocket Lab's an interesting company, New Zealand-based. They're now, I think, next to SpaceX, they do the most amount of orbital launches in a year.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that underscores how strategic investment into a particular area of the space segment, such as the one targeted by Rocket Lab, a very agile, small rocket to deliver small payloads exactly in orbit where you need them, can be a very effective way for a smaller country or a smaller company to become internationally competitive and be considered, as you said, sort of one of the major players behind the few bigger ones who monopolize the sector, such as SpaceX at the moment for launches.
Gilmore Space are hoping to replicate that sort of expertise here in Australia. Only time will tell what happens there. The sorts of lessons learnt from the Spirit mission, is that being ploughed back into the next satellite, or is that sort of, have we reached an end now of this?
Absolutely. I think
that's what we saw with FedSat. We build a satellite, it's very wonderful, and then nothing happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this is what we absolutely don't want to happen. The lessons learned from Spirit are already being implemented, for example, by the contribution that the University of Melbourne and then through the Melbourne Space Laboratory is delivering to the Australian lunar rover project. And so the experience on our thermal control system on Spirit is being mapped into the thermal control system that we're going to use to ensure that the Australian rover will survive transit to the moon, orbiting around the moon, and then operations on the surface when it will be on the moon later this decade, hopefully.
That's Professor Nicola Trenti from the University of Melbourne. And this is Space Time. Still to come, the International Space Station to remain in orbit for an additional 2 years. And later in the Science Report, the World Meteorological Organization says neutral El Niño-La Niña conditions should persist until at least the middle of the year. All that and more still to come on Space Time. The International Space Station is now expected to remain in orbit for an additional 2 years, thereby extending its operational life to 2032. The United States Senate Commerce Committee advanced a revised NASA Authorization Bill S-933, thereby extending the life of the International Space Station and implementing some of the changes to the Artemis Lunar Exploration Program sought by NASA. The extension is required because of ongoing delays in the commercial low Earth orbit space station program, which involves private companies building their own orbital space stations. The bill directs NASA to maintain International Space Station operations at current levels. It instructs the agency not to begin the transition preparing for deorbiting the station until at least one of the commercial space station successors are operational. The first modules of the International Space Station were launched way back in 1998. The 450-ton orbital outpost circles the Earth at an average altitude of about 413 kilometres, travelling at an orbital speed of 27,600 kilometres an hour, with each orbit lasting approximately 92.9 minutes. The new version of the Senate Commerce Committee bill also supports NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman's decision to increase lunar launch cadence for the Artemis program to a flight every year, with standardization of the SLS rocket and launchpad facilities by not proceeding with upgrades to the Space Launch System and instead retaining the existing Block 1 version of the SLS upper stage rather than proceeding to develop a new Block 1B exploration upper stage version. The bill also authorizes NASA to develop a base on the lunar surface in line with White House directives to establish the initial elements of a permanent lunar outpost by 2030. The plan will see the development of a permanently manned American base on the lunar South Pole, capable of long-duration human habitation, undertaking robotic, scientific, technological, and strategic interests. However, the bill says very little about the Gateway space station, the first modules of which are now under construction on the ground and which will eventually be placed in cislunar orbit, acting as a jumping-off point for missions down to the lunar surface. The biggest failure in the new bill is the formal termination of the current Mars Sample Return mission project. Instead, it directs NASA to submit a new plan for carrying out a revised Mars Sample Return program within 120 days of enactment. The bill also endorses continued support for existing NASA missions and the proposed Mars Telecommunications Orbiter project. And it calls for new missions to send human tissues to Mars in order to study biological and environmental effects on human tissue in a Martian environment. Another mission would unlock space weather impacts on Mars, as well as more physical and life sciences studies that could support future human missions to the Martian surface. This is SpaceTime. And time now to take a brief look at some of the other stories making news in science this week with a science report. Meteorologists say the climate is likely to see neutral La Niña-El Niño conditions until at least the middle of the year. The findings by the World Meteorological Organization show that a weak La Niña event driving somewhat cooler and rainier conditions is now fading, with neutral conditions expected from now through to June. After that, scientists say the chances of a hotter, drier El Niño event rises to about 40% by July, although they admit it's difficult to predict months in advance. While there's a lot of genetic evidence to show that modern humans and Neanderthals commonly interbred across Europe, new research shows that most of that copulation involved Neanderthal males inseminating modern human females. A report in the journal Science, based on genetic evidence from 3 Neanderthal specimens, has found that the X chromosome from the subjects had on average 62% more human DNA than non-sex chromosomes. The authors say the bias could have been down to mate availability or cultural sanctions for certain combinations. Archaeologists examining the charred remains of food preserved inside ancient pottery has shown the diverse range of meals eaten by people across Europe thousands of years ago. The findings, reported in the journal PLOS ONE, identified both plant and meat remains in 58 pieces of pottery from 13 agricultural sites across northern and eastern Europe dating back to between the 6th and 3rd millennium BCE. They found samples of a wide variety of grasses, berries, leaves and seeds, with plants often found alongside meat in the same pot. They say the mixtures of food found varied from region to region, likely due to the kinds of foods available in each area. A retired American chiropractor now living in Australia has come out with the outrageous claim that smoking can cure cancer. Now, before we go any further, let's state categorically that there have been thousands of scientific studies undertaken clearly showing beyond any reasonable doubt that smoking, be it vape, cigarettes, cigars, whatever, causes cancer. The skeptic's Tim Mendham says this latest falsehood quickly circulated around the world, despite repeated counter-arguments put forward by the Cancer Council.
Some of these things just appear out of nowhere, and you wonder, what are they thinking? It seems to be a one-off. I don't know how much support this guy has. He's a fellow named Brian Ardis, who's a retired chiropractor. He's apparently an Australian podcaster, although I haven't heard him. He's saying that tobacco can cure all forms of cancer and a whole range of other conditions as well, including, if I may go on, smallpox, chickenpox, herpes, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, all cancers and tumours. So it's a pretty all-round cure-all for a whole lot of diseases.
It says a lot about the quality of chiropractors, doesn't it?
It does. Equality in quotes. There's a lot of chiropractors who are dealing with some areas which are really outside their areas of expertise. Chiropractic can cure bedwetting, asthma, all sorts of different things that you seem to have no relation to a spine, apart from the fact that this notion of a subluxation is a thing based on your spine which affects every nerve in your body. But yeah, no, there's a lot of nonsense around the chiropractors. Some chiropractors, most chiropractors are putting forward, but this guy is not running on his chiropractic expertise. He's running on, I'm not sure what expertise he has actually in treating cancer. But I mean, it's almost harking back to pre-medical days. People were leeching people, bleeding people, which makes to a certain extent. There's examples in Tudor times of ingesting buttered spiders to cure headaches. It's an interesting idea. Yes, now there's no evidence that tobacco cures cancer. There's a lot of evidence that tobacco adds to cancer, including this one fact check I saw was that tobacco contains over 70 carcinogens and is linked with at least 16 types of cancer.
Also, tobacco causes cancer.
That's right. Tobacco causes cancer, and it doesn't cure cancer. And you wonder, why is he saying this? Is it just for notoriety? Is he in the pay of big tobacco? Who knows? It's a silly thing to say. It's a dangerous thing to say, and he has been put down very quickly.
That's the skeptic's Tim Mendham, and this is Space Time. That's the show for now. SpaceTime is available every Monday, Wednesday and Friday through Bytes.com, SoundCloud, YouTube, your favourite podcast download provider, and from SpaceTimeWithStuartGary.com. SpaceTime's also broadcast through the National Science Foundation on Science Zone Radio and on both iHeartRadio and TuneIn Radio. And you can help to support our show by visiting the SpaceTime store for a range of promotional merchandising goodies, or by becoming a SpaceTime patron, which gives you access to triple episode commercial-free versions of the show, as well as lots of bonus audio content which doesn't go to air, access to our exclusive Facebook group, and other rewards. Just go to SpaceTimeWithStuartGary.com for full details.
You've been listening to SpaceTime with Stuart Gary. This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.